There's been bursts of gunfire by members of the Presidential Guard who are still loyal to President Marcos and who are still in the palace grounds.
As night fell, the people continued to form a human barrier against the tanks of Mr. Marcos.
Throughout his turbulent years, 9 of them under martial law, the President of the Philippines has remained America's man.
His wife, Imelda. Some say she rules the country through him. A former beauty queen, she has perhaps as much political influence as her husband.
The American belief is that the Philippines is lurching towards civil war on a massive scale.
Manila is a city of vivid contrasts. The opulent mansions of the wealthy few are insulated from the city's poor in sealed-off compounds bristling with barbed wire.
With his country crippled by 40% unemployment, he couldn't resist American pressure to hold an early election.
As a politician, Corazon Aquino is a novice. She is untainted by scandal, and the enthusiasm she generates in her followers is clearly spontaneous.
Do you think it will be a fair election?
It won't be, but anyway, I think I'll win in spite of Mr. Marcos.
We may not be able to avoid violence or fraud, but by and large it will be a fair, honest and clean election.
Until today, the 2 monitoring groups who are each conducting their own counts had both put Corazon Aquino ahead, albeit by different margins. Then, with total predictability, the government-sponsored group moved President Marcos ahead.
President Marcos is winning. And
we have witnessed and heard disturbing reports of efforts to undermine the integrity of the process.
Hereby proclaims Ferdinand E. Marcos as the duly elected President of the Philippines.
The largest rally seen in the whole of the election. From here, the opposition adopts a new tactic, civil disobedience. Helicopters ferried weapons into the army camp in a Manila suburb where, according to some reports, as many as 1,000 soldiers have defected and joined the leaders of the revolt.
I'm asking the decent elements of the armed forces to wake up and assert themselves and do their job, their just job, to protect the Filipino people.
What happened over the weekend in Manila has finally broken President Reagan's resolve to work on with Mr. Marcos. The debate now is not only what should be done next, but how publicly America should be seen doing it.
Few foreign affairs issues dominate Capitol Hill as the Philippines does today. No fewer than 3 inquiries involving dozens of congressmen and senators are going on. On one side of the road, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is looking at Philippines' electoral fraud, and on the other, this congressional committee is hearing allegations on the alleged financial misdoings of the Marcos family.
The question must be asked whether we can justify sending $260 million a year in economic and military aid to the Philippines when the leadership of that country is simultaneously investing over $250 million in American real estate.
This is one of the cornerstones of the allegations, a $19 million mansion and estate on Long Island. Witnesses allege it to be a classic Marcos holding, held in other people's names so that no documentary evidence would ever tie it directly to the Philippine First family. Yet here is Mrs. Marcos photographed with a party on the veranda, and in a blurred image, with the building contractor who fixed the place up. His testimony claimed Mrs. Marcos is the owner, behaves like it, gives the orders, and regards it as a weekend cottage. Back to the Congressional Committee.
President Marcos' salary is roughly $5,700 a year. That is, so far as we know, his only known, public, and legitimate source of income. It suggests either that he has a very good investment advisor or that the resources he has acquired for the purpose of purchasing these properties have been corruptly obtained.
A Republican dissenter on the committee argues that with still no direct evidence of Marcos holdings in America, this is an attempt to swing the Philippine elections.
This particular issue is nothing more than a witch hunt, never has been. My good friend, the chairman of this committee, Mr. Solars, is an avowed enemy of President Marcos.
Then an insight into how the Philippines is now proving such a domestic American political issue.
But if you want to go back and look at his campaign report, probably all of the individual contributions to his political campaign were made by anti-Marcos people.
Solomon queried whether the committee wasn't in danger of looking at endless leaders and their wealth.
Now, next it'll be the British Prime Minister. We're going to say that the British Prime Minister, with her salary, could not possibly improve her net worth during her term of office.
Despite the exchanges, the evidence continues. Complex maps of intriguing deals that allegedly disguise the Marcos' ownership of vast holdings on Manhattan. This is the largest office block on Wall Street, value $100 million. The new Herald shopping center in Midtown Manhattan, value $60 million. At this, the largest office block on Madison Avenue. Like all the rest, not actually registered in the Marcos names, but a trail of verbal admissions allegedly leads straight to the palace door in Manila. And it's not just Marcos and money. Today, the New York Times leads with revelations about his war record. He never was the hero he claimed.
It is not the first time that the US has looked on as a strategic third world ally has tottered towards upheaval, nor that ally's first family has exported the national wealth for private gain in the United States. The parallels with Iran are uncomfortably close. Though America is better informed this time about what's happening in the Philippines, no one in Congress believes that the United States is any better placed to deal with what happens next. Jon Snow, ITN, Washington.
President Ferdinand Marcos can claim some right to having his image carved in rock if years spent in the presidential palace are a measure of success. He has seen American presidents come and go, and no one here doubts he will win again, since he has built around him a political and military machine powerful enough to ensure he wins. For 9 years he imposed martial law, and allegations of ballot rigging, bribery, political murders have surrounded him, but still President Marcos survives. By his wife Imelda, a former beauty queen, she has perhaps as much charisma and political influence as her husband. Some say she rules the country through him. The country they rule over is rich, but its people are poor. It has a wealth of fruit and vegetables, it has gold deposits and offshore oil, yet 40% of its people are unemployed, and it has foreign debts of $26 billion. Its capital, Manila, is a city of vivid contrasts. The opulent mansions of the wealthy few are insulated from the city's poor in sealed-off compounds bristling with barbed wire. An exclusive elite play polo. They are bankers, financiers, jewelers, oilmen and dealers in gold. Or, as in the case of one player here, they are related to the president.
But there's another very different side to life in Manila. I'm standing at the top of the city's municipal rubbish dump. It's putrid in the hot sun, but it provides a livelihood and homes for several hundred people.
They are looking for plastic bags, scrap metal, tins and cans. 1,000 cans fetch 4p from the factories which recycle them. A kilo of plastic bags fetches 2p. The families, from children to grandparents, live where they work, on the rubbish tip. The beach, too, is home to the poor of Manila, a street away from the prosperous business district. His opponents say the new society President Marcos promised is symbolized not by the face carved in the rock, but by the face on the beach. John Suchet, News at 10, in the Philippines. She was, in her own words, a simple housewife and mother until the 21st of August, 1983. On that day, her husband, the country's opposition leader, Benigno Aquino, returned from 3 years' exile in America. As he walked down the aircraft steps at Manila Airport, he was shot dead, a martyr to his followers, and his grave a shrine. Today and every day, as presidential candidate, his widow dresses in yellow in memory of the yellow ribbons of welcome her husband never saw. As a politician, Cory Aquino is a novice. It showed when she blundered into making ambiguous statements about the communists. But it shows too in her complete openness and obvious sincerity. She is untainted by scandal, and the enthusiasm she generates in her followers is clearly spontaneous. All this in contrast to her opponent. Her political platform is direct, let's get rid of Marcos and start again. She clearly believes she can do it.
For British television, how's your campaign going?
Excellent.
Do you think it'll be a fair election?
It won't be, but anyway, I think I'll win in spite of Mr. Marcos.
You're fighting a very experienced political machine. Can you beat it?
Sure I can, with the help of the Filipino people.
You're confident?
Yes, very.
But to do that, she must translate the raw emotion she has unleashed into actual votes. And in that task, she does have potentially a most powerful ally.
It is the church, which has been a dominant force in the Philippines since the Spanish first colonized the country 400 years ago. And as a direct result of that colonization, the Philippines is today the only predominantly Christian country in the Far East.
Its outspoken leader, Cardinal Sin, a constant thorn in the president's side, has issued a pastoral letter warning of undue pressures that he said would be put on the voters. And as if to reinforce his point, he chose to read his letter in the church where Benigno Aquino's body had lain after his murder.
Your Eminence, you warned your congregation against resisting undue pressures in the election. What pressures do you mean?
Pressures against freedom.
Give the camera a chance.
Against freedom. So it means that we should be free as a people.
Do you believe this election will be corrupt?
Well, we would like that it should be clean.
Is the church taking sides in this election?
We do not take sides, but we are after cleanliness in the election.
And that is clearly provided by Cory Aquino, who is giving the president his first credible challenge in 20 years. So credible that he has hinted at a military coup if she should win. The mother and housewife has truly found a new role. John Suchet, News at 10, in the Philippines.
They pass here for a kind of Filipino mobile art, outrageously gaudy, with chrome accessories and nickel stallions, eclectic names and religious paraphernalia. But the significance of Filipino jeepneys goes far beyond their presence in the chaotic madness of Manila's traffic. They are, in fact, colorful symbols of this country's American connection. Jeeps left behind by the American forces when the Philippines were liberated in 1945 and dolled up in the expansive mood of the time. Today, the 500 American firms who operate here represent an investment of $2.5 billion. They employ 60,000 people and they generate 10% of all economic activity in the country. But in the last 2 years, American investment has fallen to serious levels in a country where 70% of the people live below the poverty line. Throughout his turbulent years, 9 of them under martial law, the President of the Philippines has remained America's man. But as his corrupt dictatorship grew, so did American impatience. Marcos ignored repeated American calls for reform to his system of government. But with his country crippled by foreign debt, negative growth and 40% unemployment, he couldn't resist American pressure to hold an early election.
We start with the belief that given the problems which face this country, that an essential condition for solving those problems is the establishment of a degree of political consensus within the country which has not existed for some time. And that once that consensus is established, that then the country can move on and begin addressing some of its other serious problems.
These guerrillas are potentially the Philippines' biggest problem and America's greatest worry. They belong to the NPA, the Communist New People's Army. These highly disciplined, ideologically committed guerrillas now move freely in nearly a quarter of the country's 42,000 villages. Their numbers have grown to 20,000, but they have a support base of over 1 million. Once pinned down to the countryside, they can now operate in urban areas. The Americans are terrified about the way in which their numbers have increased, and they are not alone in putting the blame for that on the social and economic bankruptcy of the Marcos years.
The ideologues do not have to talk to the peasants, to the workers, or to the students about Marx. All they do is talk about Marcos. So it is very clear that the failure of governments, the failure of economic and social programs has made it very easy for the communists to enter the main door of the farms, of the farmers' homes.
To fight the 20,000 communists, the Philippine Army has more than 250,000 men and millions of dollars in American aid. But all this has counted for little. The army has conspicuously failed to halt the communist advance. From time to time, the army makes a public show of capturing a few guerrillas. It's done in the main to boost domestic and international confidence. But the American belief is that the Philippines is lurching towards civil war on a massive scale if the communist insurgency continues to defeat the Philippine army. It's a measure of the divisive effect the Marcos years have caused, that while the government considers the communists the enemy, some business institutions and even the church regard the NPA as more nationalist.
This NPA that they're talking about, they're not communists. They're just disgruntled people who went to the hills. But the moment there is a new leadership, these people in the hills may come down and surrender. I was meeting with many of them. They came to my house. They also came here. And we talk. And they are not communists.
This is the other reason for American interest in a Philippine election which commits its winner to political reform. Clark Air Force Base provided a vital military facility for the Americans during the Vietnam War, and today its landing strip can handle any US Air Force plane. It's an important logistics base, storing 1 million square feet of war materiel, and it's thought nuclear weapons. But if Clark Air Force Base is important, Subic Bay is the prize. It's the reason the Americans have contained their frustration with the Marcos government for so long. Subic has a deep natural harbor. It's the base for the American 7th Fleet, 80 ships and 550 aircraft. Its supply depot is the Navy's largest, and it has the best ship repair facilities in the world. It employs 26,000 Filipinos, and its presence generates $240 million to the Philippine economy. Subic Bay is on a short-term lease, but the Americans are determined to hold on to it at any cost. From time to time, the uncertainty of Filipino politics has prompted thoughts of alternatives to Subic Bay. In a word, the Americans feel there are none. America's 7th Fleet operates in 2 naval theaters. From Subic Bay, it's only a few days steaming time to the Gulf, and the sea lanes through which 80% of the West's raw materials pass. But even more crucial is the position of Subic Bay in relation to the growth of Soviet naval power. Since 1979, the Soviets have established a major naval complex at the former American base at Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam. That huge Soviet presence is only 750 miles from the Philippines. American naval strategists say that makes Subic irreplaceable.
The Pacific Fleet, the Soviet Pacific Fleet, is now the largest of their 4 fleets. The United States obviously has a concern over the Soviet presence in the Pacific, particularly the Western Pacific. We're less than 800 nautical miles from Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam, and the growth of the Soviets' presence in the Pacific gives us a higher degree of concern. So from a geographic standpoint, we're very important. We're strategic.
Subic Bay explains one facet of American interest in the Philippine elections. Officially, the Americans say they're neutral, and they say they'll work with whoever gets power in the Philippines. But more realistically, Mrs. Aquino says that if she wins, she'd like to renegotiate the lease on Subic Bay, while Mr. Marcos will keep things pretty much as they are. The Americans have done their best to try to encourage the Marcos government to bring in far-reaching reforms and to appear less demonstrably corrupt. So far, Mr. Marcos has largely managed to ignore that, and there's every indication that if he wins again on February 7th, he'll do the same. Trevor McDonald, ITN, Subic Bay, the Philippines.
Standing at the entrance to the town of Tarlac, in a province 120 miles north of Manila, is a simple monument. It commemorates one horrific episode in World War II, which Filipinos came to call the Death March. Hundreds of Filipino prisoners of war, captured by the Japanese, were made to walk more than 50 miles through rough country and under the unforgiving heat of the summer sun. Defeated and helpless, even those on crutches were forced to march. Those who couldn't were bayoneted to death. 44 years later, the scenic province of Tarlac, one of 73 in the Philippines, is shaping up for the most bitter, divisive, and most openly hostile contest in the presidential election. Even more to the point, though, the cheating has started even before the counting of ballots.
From the start, the whole process has been filled with cheating. It is not only the counting of, the casting of votes and then the counting of ballots, which makes an election, but the whole process itself.
Whether or not that whole process is seen to be fair could depend on these young people, volunteers of NAMFREL, the National Movement for Free Elections, who have been signing up here in Tarlac. NAMFREL is a citizens' poll-watching organization which has acquired a higher reputation for impartiality than its government-appointed counterpart. There is a poignancy about this gathering which makes it unique in a country professing to be a democracy. This group of people singing in praise of their beloved country, the Pearl of the Orient, their national anthem calls it, will go to every polling station in the province to make an independent assessment of how the election is run. They openly acknowledge the difficulty of their task.
We pray, Lord, for peaceful, free, and honest elections. Bless our volunteers, protect them from all harm of soul and body. Lord, we put all our trust in you.
Training sessions, with the help of rudimentary classroom charts, tell NAMFREL volunteers what kind of election abuse to look for. Abuse which NAMFREL's leaders fear may be considerable here, since Tarlac has been targeted by the Marcos government as a province in which the president must not lose.
Definitely, we heard that the objectives here will be that the ruling party or the candidate, the president himself, should win in this province at all costs. That's what we heard.
The president's party wants to win in Tarlac at all cost because this is gilt-edged Aquino country. Mrs. Aquino's husband's grandfather did enough during the Spanish-American War to have an army camp named after him. Cory Aquino's father, a wealthy landowner and a devout Roman Catholic, had this church built in the grounds of his vast estate. It was patterned after the shrine at Lourdes. But this is the centerpiece of the Aquino influence in Tarlac. The family sugar refinery stands on what was part of the last big Spanish plantation in this country in the 19th century. Before martial law, it was the largest single personal holding. Today, it's a key element in the economy of Tarlac province. It employs 7,500 workers, and the sugarcane reaped from its 20,000 acres produces 7,000 tons of sugar a day. In the view of President Marcos and his supporters, if Corazon Aquino were to lose in her own hometown, where her family influence has been so great for decades, her national campaign would be totally discredited. So, to make sure she does not win here, the tactics employed by the president's supporters go beyond the universal practice of defacing opposing slogans. Pro-Marcos votes are being openly bought. These tricycle drivers are paid 100 pesos to advertise the claims of the president's party. That's less than £4, but it represents about 3 days' wages and is therefore a considerable inducement. Those who cannot be bought are subjected to various forms of harassment. It's not done in the open or in daylight, and the targets are in the main the people who live in the small villages and huts in the outlying districts or barrios.
Armed men in the jeeps go from house to house and telling the people to vote, of course, by just putting fear on the people there in the barrios. They might really vote for those in the administration, President Marcos, of course.
We've been getting reports about harassment, intimidation, armed men going out at night, knocking at their doors, telling these people whom to vote for, or sometimes asking them not to show up on election day.
Many people in the villages were too frightened to talk about that kind of intimidation. But this man described an encounter with an official who threatened his life if he didn't vote for the president's party, the KBL.
He told me that if I will not vote KBL because he suspected that I will be voting for the Cory Laurel faction, he told me that if you not vote KBL, better go out of my territory because your life might be in danger. He told me that. Those are the exact words.
I went to the house of one local official in Tarlac, from where it's alleged men with guns are dispatched at nights to harass Aquino supporters. In the courtyard, I saw 3 men with Kalashnikov rifles, but they disappeared before we could film them. President Marcos does not claim that the election here can be completely free of violence, but he believes the result will be fair.
There will be some instances where we may not be able to avoid violence or fraud. But by and large, it will be fair, honest, and clean elections. That's my view. I don't think that either party can change the real verdict in the polls.
In Tarlac, though, the national movement for free elections, working from this shack where its volunteers will assemble on election morning, have a completely different view.
The way things are going right now, basing on information that we get from our volunteers, from ordinary people coming to us, reporting what's happening around, we can say that it's not going to be honest, it's not going to be fair, neither it's going to be clean.
If the evidence here in Tarlac province is anything to go by, then the millions of words written and spoken about a clean, free, fair and honest election in this country will be to no avail. The most persistently expressed sentiment heard during this campaign, everywhere and time again, has been about the need for change. But that is not a view shared by President Marcos or by his government. And it would appear that in this country, nothing or nobody, no snap election or electoral process can thwart the will of the president. Trevor McDonald, ITN, Tarlac province in the Philippines.
Luneta Park, late afternoon, downtown Manila. And this is Cory Aquino's closing rally at the end of an extraordinary presidential election campaign. In a country where democracy lay dormant for so long, nothing like these crowds has been seen for decades. An opposition, once badly split, has mobilized large sections of the population to pose the most credible challenge to the Marcos government in 20 years. With neither the resources nor the political organization of the Marcos political machine, this huge crowd represents what Cory Aquino's candidacy has been able to achieve: a populist movement demanding change. They waited at Luneta Park well into the night for Cory Aquino to arrive. She began this short campaign a political unknown. She was ending it in the style of a heroine. Away from the rallies, Mrs. Aquino has been fighting a battle of words with President Marcos.
What is it that has brought this nation to its knees? Who has brought us to this posture of humiliation and ridicule before the world? Who has desecrated the pearl of the Orient and besmirched the brilliance of its luster? The answer is inescapably clear. Mr. Marcos.
There is a danger here of this woman running a government on nothing but personal vengeance, vindictiveness, casual, flippant character assassination, disregard of all the decencies in life, disregard of the teachings of Christ and teachings of our church. This to me makes them more dangerous than perhaps even communism.
The focus of this election has shifted irrevocably to the possibility of fraud. In the final hours of the campaign, NAMFREL, the National Movement for Free Elections, has been instructing its volunteers how to spot election malpractice. They are told to watch for fake ballots, to take flashlights to polling stations in the event of power failure, even to throw their bodies across ballot boxes which may be switched. It might be regarded as ominous that the President's party, the KBL, is already making a remarkably detailed forecast of how the voting will go.
Marcos, 13,464,000 votes. Mrs. Aquino, 10,281,000 votes. Assuming a 24 million voter turnout, this would mean a win for President Marcos of 56% over 43%.
Two large teams of international observers are here to watch the conduct of this election. The co-leader of one of the groups is the Northern Ireland MP, John Hume.
We have concluded that the laws and procedures are such that malpractice can be detected, especially that which is attempted or perpetrated on a wholesale basis. We hope that this will not occur, but we will not hesitate to expose it if it does.
But neither Mr. Hume's group nor the American congressional delegation will be able to police the 90,000 polling stations in this country. And that's one reason why Mrs. Aquino's supporters say they'll take to the streets if they feel she's been cheated of victory.
Well, Mrs. Aquino's margin is so wide that nobody will believe that she can lose this election. So if that happens, you will have instant demonstrations, protests, meetings all over the country. And I believe that that will be continuous. Cory Aquino has promised to lead it. Doyle Laurel and all the leaders will be in the streets. It will be a do-or-die situation.
This is an effort, as the President says, of the opposition to condition the minds of the people to accept and to consider as inevitable an opposition victory. Part of it, of course, is electoral strategy, because there are a lot of people who like to ride winners. But it's not going to work. I'm afraid it's not going to work.
The President's final election rally was, as usual, a masterpiece of organization, with scores of buses and trucks to bring his supporters into the city from the outlying areas. That is not surprising in a country where the President's party has 68 of the 73 governors, 96% of all the mayors, and 133 of the 164 MPs. But something significant has happened to Mr. Marcos and his supporters during this campaign. The president's opponent has claimed the moral high ground and has managed to control the debate. Whichever way this election goes, we may have witnessed the beginning of the end of the Marcos years. Trevor McDonald, ITN, Manila. The symbolism was dramatic. The Roman Catholic Church, which had voiced its concern about unprecedented election fraud and violence, tolled its bells today at the start of an election marred by everything the Church feared most. Corazon Aquino, who transformed the outrage at her husband's assassination into a national campaign, was confident after she voted today that her political odyssey had overcome the might of the Marcos election machine.
Today is my day, and I have never been more confident in my life of anything. As today, I am going to win, and I owe it all to the Filipino people.
Well,
but her opponent, the president, was equally confident.
the last surveys indicate I will get 63% of the vote. You can gather it from there. But if the difference is only 3 million, I'll be disappointed.
And the president was given a rousing reception by his own supporters before he cast his ballot in Ilocos Norte, his hometown. But as dawn broke over the provinces, which will return more than 80% of the vote in this election, a disturbing pattern was emerging. Barely an hour after they were being dispatched to polling stations around the country, volunteers of NAMFREL, the Independent Citizens Poll Monitoring Group, began to receive complaints of intimidation, harassment, and fraudulent voters' lists. According to NAMFREL volunteers and voters at one polling station in Mrs. Aquino's province of Tarlac, community captains loyal to the president's party, the KBL, had stationed these men nearby to try to intimidate constituents into voting for Mr. Marcos. We saw men with guns near polling stations. The majority of them disappeared as we arrived, but this man carried an Armalite rifle. That's illegal under the election code here, but when I spoke to one community leader, he predicted a Marcos victory and said the guns were intended to keep the election peaceful. Back in Manila, though, NAMFREL volunteers were forced to withdraw from a number of polling stations. There was jeering in the streets when they decided to return to one polling station from which they'd been thrown out. When they tried to reoccupy the building, a school, fighting broke out. NAMFREL say their opponents in this fight were government supporters who were attempting to hijack a ballot box. But the NAMFREL volunteers successfully managed to hold them off. The police later arrived. The door with the protected ballot box was opened to general jubilation. The ballot box itself had been protected by a nun and another woman polling official. The counting of votes is now going on. There's been a high turnout, but it'll be at least 24 hours before the results in the majority of the 73 provinces are known.
The presence of scores of international observers here has done nothing to stop widespread election malpractice and violence, but then it was never intended to. But even more lastingly damaging is the fact that the highly reputable citizens poll-watching body NAMFREL is terribly unhappy about what has gone on here today. The voting has ended, but the controversy has just begun, with the possibility that those who feel they've been cheated again will find other ways of making their voices heard. Trevor McDonald, ITN, Manila.
In the surprising absence of police or army, supporters of Corazon Aquino take it upon themselves to guard the warehouse where dozens of ballot boxes wait under lock and key to be counted. When the first are taken out, it is to the crowd's relief that thus far the boxes have been untampered with. Boxes containing ballots these voters are certain will take Corazon Aquino to Malacanang Presidential Palace.
If the turnout is as massive as it shows right now, I think we can still win.
Will President Marcos ever allow that to happen?
Whether Marcos allows it or not, I think it depends on the people, on what they are determined to do. Even if Marcos does not allow it, I think our people will kick him out of Malacanang Palace.
After the first count, the tallies containing the figures in brown envelopes are put in a car to be driven to the central counting headquarters. But this is when the voting returns are most vulnerable, and the crowd will not let the car go without an escort, fearful that it will be hijacked by Marcos supporters and the envelopes destroyed. Two men try to calm the crowd by offering to accompany the car, but the crowd don't trust them, suspecting they are Marcos men in Cory colours. Finally, the crowd wins, the returns are removed from the car and lovingly shepherded back to the precinct voting office, where they'll be guarded until the final count. John Suchet, ITN, in Manila. At the first of two masses attended by Corazon Aquino today, her supporters packed every pew and aisle to hear her thank them for their support and promise victory. In scenes remarkable even for this intensely religious country, the congregation poured out their emotion. At the second Mass, Cardinal Sin threw away the Church's stance of impartiality with a sharp attack on the government's handling of the election.
Our whole nation are held in the grip of uncertainty as the results of the elections are not yet available to us after 2 full days.
After 2 full days, a result is not even near. Figures that have been released are confused and disputed. Until today, the two monitoring groups who are each conducting their own counts had both put Corazon Aquino ahead, albeit by different margins. Then, with total predictability, the government-sponsored group moved President Marcos ahead. Less predictable was the reaction from the audience.
President Marcos is winning. And
The two groups, one government-sponsored and one independent, have each accused the other of lying and falsifying the figures.
This is the government-sponsored count, and if at the end of the day both groups produce different results, which is quite possible, this is the one the government will accept and President Marcos will remain in power. John Suchet, ITN, in Manila.
It was always good-natured, and it owed much more to post-election zeal than any attempt to make a political point. And yet there was in this demonstration a germ of symbolism. Corazon Aquino's supporters had taken over a small section of the lobby of the Marcos-dominated Batasan Pambansa, the Filipino parliament. By such scenes are revolutions heralded. Outside the parliament building, a large crowd had gathered to be present at the start of the process which should eventually decide the winner of the presidential election. There was no trouble, although it did look very much as though the police were prepared for any eventuality. As the numbers of people grew, more and more riot equipment was brought in. But in fact, the only time the police even moved from their places was when they stepped in to prevent a clash between Marcos and Aquino supporters. And even the reason for that was trivial. The pro-Aquino supporters claimed that the outnumbered Marcos people had been paid to make a showing. Some members of the Filipino parliament looked down from the balcony of the building. They had much more serious business inside. What this parliament is now supposed to do, to end the great confusion about this presidential contest, is to have the Speaker open the sealed envelopes with the certificates of return from the 73 provinces and 58 cities and to canvass a tally. But nothing's been as simple as that in this election. Today, the Parliament went into a long procedural wrangle, with 2 adjournments, and finally agreed to meet again tomorrow, having accomplished little today. The government-controlled Commission on Elections, COMELEC, had more problems today with what is still being called its quick count. After the walkout of some of its computer staff last night, in protest, they say, at being asked to massage the figures, other staff failed to show up today. But the COMELEC count is going ahead. It continues to show President Marcos leading by 200,000 votes. In contrast, the count by NAMFREL, the National Movement for Free Elections, shows Mrs. Aquino ahead by about 700,000 votes. The American Congressional Observer Delegation left for home this morning, saying quite plainly they weren't impressed by some aspects of this election.
We have witnessed and heard disturbing reports of efforts to undermine the integrity of the process, both during the voting and the vote counting process, which is still underway. Even within the last 24 hours, serious charges have been made in regard to the tabulation system. The count is at a critical moment. We share the concern expressed to us both by government officials and citizen monitors that the remainder of the Kamalek and Namfrau quick count operations proceed to credible conclusions and without further delay.
Tonight, Mrs. Aquino attended a special mass in the business district of Manila. These church services have become political rallies in another form. And tonight, Mrs. Aquino's ended in political violence. 3 of her supporters were shot, and 1 was killed. She had this message for her followers.
Mr. Marcos talks of the constitutional process. He whines that we should all respect it. I, on the other hand, speak of the democratic process, and I demand that he and his cronies respect that.
Today's demonstration here at the Batasang Pambansa, the Filipino Parliament, and the church services and rallies in other parts of the city are only one dimension of a deepening crisis of this country's international relations. It's taken for granted here that the American congressional delegation sent here to observe the elections will tell President Reagan on its return to Washington that this entire electoral process from start to finish has been riddled by malpractice and fraud. Because the Americans have bases here, they've always tried to keep on good terms with President Marcos, and they've tolerated his excesses. But now there's a rising chorus of voices against their staunchest ally. And if the Americans want to keep their bases here, they'll have to listen to those people, and they may decide in the end that whatever the result of this election, Mr. Marcos is no longer a safe bet for the future. Trevor McDonald, ITN, Manila.
President Marcos, taking it for granted he has won the election, said he would set up a Council of State, invite Corazon Aquino to join it, and that it would have a unique role.
The Council of State will be the highest advisory body of the country.
It was a bold statement, considering the Parliament only began the official count this afternoon and could take up to 2 weeks to announce the winner. Certainly Corazon Aquino, who called a press conference today, looked more like a presidential winner than a candidate, commanding the attention of the world's press. She chose this occasion to appeal to the army and police to accept her as the new president.
Mrs. Aquino, why have you chosen this moment to appeal to the army and police? Tell us.
Well, first, because of the killings that are now taking place.
In fact, her appeal is much wider than that. She knows that even if she wins the election, she can never get to the presidential palace beyond this barbed wire unless the police and the army transfer their loyalty to her.
And as yet, the army shows no sign of anything other than total loyalty to President Marcos. John Suchet, News at 1 in Manila. Inside, the counting went into its 5th day. Under the Constitution, it should not take more than 15 days.
But that is only if there are no anomalies, no votes missing, no objections from the opposition. And in fact, there are plenty of all 3. But at the end of the day, none of that is likely to prevent the Speaker declaring President Marcos is the winner, and we congratulate him. John Suchet, News at 1, in the Parliament Chamber, Manila.
The proclamation was made on behalf of the Speaker, and President Marcos's majority was only half the 3 million he had hoped for.
For President Ferdinand E. Marcos, 10,807,197. Corazon C. Aquino, 9,291,716. It hereby proclaims Ferdinand E. Marcos as the duly elected President of the Philippines.
Before that, the opposition had been on their feet, hitting the Speaker with a barrage of points of order and interruptions.
I'll be standing on this parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker, because
while the chair rules,
it casts doubt on the integrity of the results.
Another matter has already intervened. We have discussed, so he's out of order. One at a time. I'm getting lost already. I'm sorry. Point of order. We are in the chair cannot hear anymore. The chair suspends the session for 1 minute.
At one point, the opposition walked out and probably won't be going to the party the president is throwing at the palace tonight.
In this park tomorrow, Corazon Aquino will hold her first mass rally since the election, and President Marcos has said the security forces will exercise maximum tolerance. Given that it's also her first rally since she officially lost, they might well have to. John Suchet, ITN, in Manila.
It has already gone down in Filipino history as the Yellow Revolution after the opposition's campaign colour. Corazon Aquino has lost the election, but she has won the moral victory, and she has won the hearts of more people than took part in today's rally. Those that did take part made this the largest rally seen in the whole of the election, larger by thousands than anything President Marcos was able to muster. From here, the opposition, smiling in defeat, adopts a new tactic, civil disobedience, a one-day national strike, delayed payment of taxes, boycott of all institutions controlled by the president, including the state press.
Although unarmed, I feel like the young boy David, prepared to face the giant Goliath. And if Goliath refuses to yield, we shall keep dipping into our arsenal of nonviolence and escalate our nonviolent struggle.
By contrast, President Marcos celebrated his victory within the walls of his palace in the presence only of close friends and aides. In his victory speech, he said the people had freely expressed their will and he would rule with their continued support.
Those words are more in hope than expectation, because Corazon Aquino's supporters have shown that the election President Marcos thought would be a formality has given him an opposition he never dreamed of, and the election he needn't even have called has weakened his presidency forever. John Suchet, ITN, in Manila.
The Grenada celebration comes at a time when Reagan at home is riding higher than ever. In the aftermath of the shuttle disaster, he's being seen here as having captured the nation's emotions and as having acted as most Americans perceive a president should act. Yet for all his success at home, the picture abroad is of a very different complexion. Philip Habib's sudden return to his role as America's emergency ambassador at large, this time over the Philippines, is perhaps the latest signal that abroad, Reagan's policy remains in serious trouble. In February alone, the month began with Haiti. Dictator Baby Doc Duvalier, sustained in power with American aid, was suddenly and embarrassingly airlifted out of his own country aboard an American Air Force plane to an exile still the subject of controversy. In the same week, the strange arrival in Washington of Angolan rebel leader Jonas Savimbi, a $600,000 PR trip to elicit funds from Mr. Reagan. Reagan's Africa man, Chester Crocker, has until now been actively working for a solution on the Namibia problem with the very Angolans that Mr. Reagan now wants to finance Savimbi to attack. And the Philippines itself. Reagan first at a news conference backing Marcos and blaming both sides for cheating.
Well, I think that we're concerned about the violence that was evident there and the possibility of fraud, although it could have been that all of that was occurring on both sides.
American experts on the ground in Manila were alarmed as they witnessed Mrs. Aquino and her followers reacting angrily to Mr. Reagan's claims. Within 6 days, as he boarded his plane after a ranch holiday, Reagan had to issue a statement now accusing Marcos, after all, of fraud. Those close to Reagan say that he's never been strong on the specifics of foreign policy, preferring, they say, to work according to a series of ideological generalizations. Until this year, he had the informed hand of Robert McFarlane, always present in the White House. But since his departure, foreign policy expertise in the coterie of advisors actually inside the White House has been notably absent. One man who's worked in high office at both the State Department and the Pentagon and who now writes for the New York Times concludes in a recent book from years of analysis that Reagan's problem goes back to the message of the Vietnam War.
And people thought, never again will the United States send troops abroad. But under President Reagan, he read that message differently, because instead of saying the American people won't tolerate any American intervention abroad, he said it won't tolerate any American military intervention abroad that A, doesn't succeed, and B, lasts a long time. And so the kinds of moves he's made have been short thrusts, success or failure. In the Lebanon, it was a short move and a failure, but he got out. In the case of Grenada, it was a short move, got out, and success. In the case of the Philippines, we haven't had to approach a decision of that magnitude as of yet.
Gelb argues Reagan is different from his predecessors, judged on both the extremity of his rhetoric and the modesty of his action.
He will also be different, I suspect, in perhaps ending his administration without a single concrete diplomatic accomplishment, whether it be in the area of settling the differences among the warring factions in Central America or in the Middle East, or in a major arms control agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union.
So whilst Reagan's memories today of Grenada may be sweet, they come at a time when his chances of making serious history on the world stage look increasingly fragile.
Helicopters ferried weapons into the army camp in a Manila suburb where, according to some reports, as many as 1,000 soldiers have defected and joined the leaders of the revolt. Those leaders have until now been among President Marcos's most trusted advisors. General Fidel Ramos, number 2 in the armed forces, was about to take over as chief of staff and is a cousin of the president. The defense minister, Juan Enrile, has served in every Marcos administration for 20 years. Both men said the election was fraudulent and called on the army to act.
There has become a elite armed forces within the armed forces of the Philippines that no longer represents the rank and file and the officer corps of the armed forces of the Philippines.
I'm asking the decent elements of the armed forces, the dedicated, courageous, patriotic members of the armed forces to wake up and assert themselves and do their job, their just job to protect the Filipino people against a tyranny that has set on this land.
President Marcos from within his palace threatened to use his artillery and warned of bloodshed. Today, hours before she went into hiding, a mass rally showed Corazon Aquino's campaign has not lost its momentum as the belief grows at home and abroad that she was only robbed of victory by fraud. And her supporters are convinced ultimately the president will have to concede.
We are delivering a message also to Mr. Marcos that we want him to step down as peacefully as possible, to have a peaceful transition, so that once and for all we can have our freedoms and democracy in our land.
After a night of demonstrations, it's now early Sunday morning in Manila, 2 days before President Marcos's inauguration. If the military have deserted in large enough numbers, he may never reach that ceremony.
An overnight statement finally killed Reagan's support for Marcos and rallied behind Defense Minister Enrile, saying his statements reinforced American concern about the electoral fraud perpetrated by Marcos. Habib arrived in Secretary of State Schultz's car. CIA Chief William Casey is in the meeting too, as is Defense Secretary Weinberger. They will determine what America does next, not least what role the huge concentration of American firepower in the Philippines must do now. The senior senator shaping foreign policy here says America must now offer Marcos asylum.
Yes, I think he should step down. I would hope that he would do so with some dispatch and with some organization, literally, of what is to follow.
This Philippine crisis meeting is still in session here. White House sources are convinced that what happened over the weekend in Manila has finally broken President Reagan's resolve to work on with Mr. Marcos. The debate now is not only what should be done next, but how publicly America should be seen doing it. Jon Snow, ITN, Washington.
They streamed onto the streets of Manila in their thousands to stop President Marcos's troops reaching the rebels. Chanting the name of Mrs. Corazon Aquino, they overwhelmed these Marines, one of the toughest outfits in the army, by sheer force of numbers. The president's men, apparently unwilling to shoot their way through, moved their awesome firepower to one side. At the palace, ringed by tanks, it was the Marcos presidency that looked under siege. In Manila's Central Park, they were still getting ready for his inauguration, though no one could say when or if that would take place. The men leading the rebellion seemed confident, moving from the Defense Ministry to the constabulary headquarters to establish a more secure base. The military rebels have been America's favorites for some time, popular among reform-minded young officers. What would their next move be now?
We will not fire the first shot, but the moment they fire the first shot, I think we will be engaged, and they will find out that either they will annihilate us or we will destroy them.
We saw a demonstration of people's power and the people's, the military personnel's response to this by those people embracing each other.
Mrs. Aquino, for her part, had a simple appeal.
I call on our people to rally to Camp Aguinaldo and Camp Crame in a show of people's power and solidarity with General Ramos and Minister Enrile.
And as night fell, the people continued to form a human barrier against the tanks of Mr. Marcos. And it was far from clear if the president's men would shoot, even if they were ordered to.
Would you order your Marines to fire at the crowd here?
No, we are not going to shoot at anybody, innocent civilian particularly.
The standoff continues, supporters bringing food to the troops in the rebel stronghold, while priests and nuns lead tens of thousands of Filipinos in candlelit prayers for peace.
Carmen Pedrosa, from your conversations you've had with Manila today, can you throw any light on the confusion that's happening there?
Well, I think it's very much a situation where there are two forces positioning themselves on who will get the better, what you call vantage point. And the Enrile Ramos faction has taken a position where they will wait until they have what you call the strength to maneuver. And Mr. Marcos is doing the same. He's staying on in Malacanang and threatening to come in. But in fact, the people have come between the two of them. So there has been a stalemate. But as I understand, there has been some violence now in the Manila International Airport. So there will be pockets of violence until there is some confrontation.
With all the pressure that's now on President Marcos, how long do you think he can remain there?
Well, it depends, really. As I have said earlier on, Mr. Marcos is a sort of person who would rather die than quit. So I think he would use all his cards, and that could take a few days or a week, depending on how the opposite side reacts to these intransigence.
Now, he has lost the American card. The Americans have now put it to him that he should step down. What notice do you think he'll take of that?
I think he will consider that simply as something that's an additional difficulty, but for him to give up, because that difficulty is not in his character. He's suicidal, I must say.
He's suicidal, but could he remain in power without American support?
He can't remain in power. As I said, I think he will die, in power, as he presumes he is. He will still be president. He's not giving up.
If Mrs. Aquino took over the presidency, would she have a popular following?
Oh, she has definitely a popular following, as you can see in the number of people that are in the streets. They're supporting her more than the Enrile Ramos faction. It's only because they're supporting Mrs. Aquino. Had they done otherwise, they wouldn't get those crowds there.
And when you say that President Marcos is suicidal, are you seriously suggesting that he would sooner commit suicide than quit?
Yes. It is in character. If he does not proceed along those lines, then I would say that he would be acting out of character.
How will he be influenced by his wife, whom you know well?
Well, I think that she is not the sort of person who would deviate from his position. she has been misjudged by a lot of people who think that she acts on her own. In fact, she has always been a clone of President Marcos. She will act only on what Marcos has decided.
But you think there will now obviously be a change of presidency, and soon?
Yes, I think so.
This evening, bonfires raged across town. For some people, though, the mood was anything but joyous. Old scores remained to be settled in this town, and some people were doing it tonight. The celebrations went on in every part of Manila, with people genuinely pleased that President Marcos had gone. But tonight, outside the presidential palace, even with President Marcos on his way out of this country, guards still loyal to him were firing on crowds around the building. We came under fire as we filmed this scene.
This has been the scene here all evening. For most of the time, the celebrations have been quite peaceful. Celebrations marking Mrs. Aquino's rise to the presidency of this country. But then, occasionally there's been bursts of gunfire by members of the Presidential Guard who are still loyal to President Marcos and who are still in the palace grounds.
Late this evening, though, the people seemed to have won the argument. They stormed the gates of the presidential palace in one of the most symbolic gestures of this revolution. Trevor McDonald, ITN, in Manila.
In Washington, it was during a blizzard on Capitol Hill yesterday that Reagan's best friend in the Senate, Paul Laxalt, received the first phone call from Marcos, offering to share power with Mrs. Aquino, but refusing to step down. After consultations with Reagan, Laxalt, who'd met with Marcos in an earlier crisis, phoned him again to tell him no deal. During the night, the White House authorized 4 Huey helicopters to fly into the Manila Palace grounds to lift the controversial Marcos entourage to nearby Clark Air Base. This morning, chaos in the White House briefing room signaled the all change in Manila. Network correspondents feverishly trying to break the story live on morning television here, as Secretary of State Schultz was brought in to announce,
"The President is pleased with the peaceful transition to a new government of the Philippines."
Recognizing the new president, Mrs. Aquino, he said,
"We pay special tribute to her for her commitment to nonviolence, which has earned her the respect of all Americans."
No member of the Reagan team had ever previously spoken so warmly of Mrs. Aquino. Indeed, America has from the outset been uneasy about her.
She has said to us that she is firmly opposed to the Marxist insurgency.
For the White House, it has been a traumatic time. Learning to adjust to Aquino, parting with Marcos have not been easy. Even now, no ill is being spoken of him. He leaves accused of having killed political opponents and having defrauded his people in the ballot. Has he not left a grave stain on American foreign policy?
He hasn't left a grave stain on our foreign policy. He has left, and I'm sure he would wish the conditions were otherwise. At the same time, I think it is well to recognize that over a long period of years, Ferdinand Marcos has been a staunch friend of the United States.
5 years ago, the National Security Council here warned the White House of trouble with Marcos, but observers say that when his demise was confirmed today, that didn't find America any better prepared. Jon Snow, News at 10, Washington.
At the Filipino consulate in London, supporters of Mrs. Aquino had been gathering all day waiting for news of Mr. Marcos's departure. It came by telephone at 3 o'clock.
For us, it means a new age, a challenge, a start, to build again.
Does Mrs. Aquino have a large job on her hands?
Yes. It's something that is, I would think, a big challenge for her. And we pray, we hope that she can cope with it. We definitely are willing to cooperate. We are willing to work hard in order for us to get back on our feet again.
There are 25,000 Filipinos living in Britain. Many of them will be celebrating tonight.
We're really happy that we just heard it's confirmed. And
I think now we'll all have a good night's sleep.
Do you think there'll be a lot of celebrating among the Filipino community in the West?
I think even here.
Yes, and even here. I'm already got a bottle ready at home.
Revolution Day +1 dawned in Manila after a climactic night which saw the departure of Ferdinand Marcos from the center of political power here. The joy and the excitement of the people was still flooding onto the streets today. These were the scenes outside the Malacanang Palace, and they were profoundly symbolic. For 20 years, these streets had been closed to the people. They'd been kept away by barricades and barbed wire and by the 15,000-strong Presidential Security Guard. Now the main thoroughfare leading to the Presidential Palace was open to all again, and the only military presence was a distinctly friendly one.
But the atmosphere here is quite a good one, isn't it?
Very good atmosphere, very peaceful.
One of celebration, you might say, almost.
This is a celebration of the people who supported the new administration.
From behind the once austere gates of the Malacanang Palace, soldiers chatted amiably with their countrymen, charged no more with keeping a presidential dictator in splendid isolation. There was no question of where their support lay now. The new mood of the military was the mood of the country, and it was being expressed everywhere. Inside the palace courtyard and under the Spanish colonial-style balcony, where the Marcoses appeared, sang, and held court, the people now gathered to celebrate the start of the new presidency. Every vantage point was taken. The Marcoses had never had a crowd like this in their palace courtyard. Thousands were trying to get into the palace. Never in 20 years had the people come so close to the seat of power. Never had there been a greater sense of revolution. Across town, the new president of the Philippines, now being given her full name here, Corazon Aquino, appeared with her vice president to greet her supporters after a night in which she said she'd only been permitted 2 hours sleep. One of her biggest worries now must be how long in government she'll continue to enjoy this acclaim. At a press conference a few hours later, she talked about just that challenge.
The challenges and difficulties that our people and I face are daunting. But I am fortunate to be the president of a people who have demonstrated the courage, the tenacity, the idealism, and the self-sacrifice to meet any goal and overcome any obstacle.
And Mrs. Aquino announced the members of her new cabinet, who'll be given the task of steering the country on its new course.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Salvador H. Laurel.
One of the loudest ovations was given to Jose Concepcion, the man who ran the independent poll-watching body NAMFREL, who's been made Minister for Trade and Industry, and who'll play a crucial role in Mrs. Aquino's list of priorities.
As I had said before, our first concern will be to help improve the lot of the poor, the unemployed, and the underemployed.
Mrs. Aquino was then questioned about one of the more genuinely controversial issues of the election campaign, what she'll do about the American military bases.
Well, I have told Mr. Habib and other American officials that I am sticking to my original position. I will respect the military bases agreement until 1991, and I am keeping my options open.
And the question on everybody's mind, though not openly expressed, did she become president because she was the widow of Ninoy Aquino?
I guess because I was the widow of Ninoy Aquino, but I think also because I am Cory Aquino.
But even before the applause for the new president could die away, there was disconcertingly hard evidence of the problems this nation faces. These crates of cash, 130 million pesos, or 4 million pounds, were intercepted by a crowd who believed the money was being taken out of the country by a relative of Mrs. Imelda Marcos. It was typical of the kind of incident which will make it difficult for Aquino supporters to forgive Mr. Marcos and to pray for him, as the Archbishop Cardinal Sin has suggested.
Let us stretch our hands in friendship and amity to others, so that the healing process may begin. As we install President Corazon Aquino as the Chief Executive of the Philippines, let us say a prayer for the man she is replacing, so that he may find the peace of mind and serenity of soul that he, like the rest of us, has been seeking.
Yes. The man who Mr. Marcos replaced as president 20 years ago believes that kind of reconciliation may now be possible.
It's going to be better now. It has been proven by experience that Philippine problems are best solved under democracy. And even relations with other countries, particularly the United States. One of the biggest worries of the United States during this time is its bases. Under democracy, they never had a problem with the bases. And it was when they destroyed democracy that they started to have problems. And so it is, this will be an indication of how good it will be from here on, since democracy has been reestablished.
There is still in this city today a feeling of stunned disbelief that the Marcos years are finally over. And it's a tribute to the resilience of the Filipino people and a comment on how quickly the old political order changes, yielding place to a new one, that there's hardly a Marcos supporter in sight. All are Aquino's people now. Very soon the celebrations will be over though, and the people and the government of this country will settle down to the massive political, economic and social problems of this country, which have been the true legacy of the Marcos years. Trevor McDonald, ITN in Manila.
The next step in his exile is likely to be taken to his £2 million home outside Honolulu. No one knows how long he'll stay here. He could eventually end up at this Marcos mansion on Long Island, another holding in his £600 million portfolio of American property. In Washington, President Reagan, who until today has stayed out of camera view since the beginning of this Philippine crisis last Saturday, is still refusing to comment.
We're here for a different purpose today, and I'm not going to take any questions on that situation.
We've not heard from you since all of these events, sir. We've not heard from you since all of these events took place in the Philippines.
There's still embarrassment here over his last comment 10 days ago, in which he blamed Mrs. Aquino with Marcos for election fraud. John Snow, News at 10, Washington.
Long friendship with Ferdinand Marcos. What are your thoughts about playing a role?
Release of the following named detainees is hereby ordered.
General Fidel Ramos reads the proclamation. Before an anxious crowd, still caught in the emotion of a dramatic change in their nation's life, he announces the names of the 33 prisoners the new president has decided to set free. The applause only confirms that these are heady days in the Philippines. Hours later, the prisoners who'd been held by the Marcos government on political charges were processed. By early evening, they were freed. It was a remarkable start to a new presidency. After a little more than 48 hours, the remaining physical evidence of the Marcos years excites only the curiosity of a museum piece. The palace of the Marcos dynasty, once resplendent in the power it wielded, looks distinctly out of place today. The pictures left hanging on the palace walls tell of the images the Marcoses had of themselves, those of stunning beauty and political invincibility. But the half-eaten meal, the bowl of caviar left on the table, tells of a hurried, unplanned departure. Back to the present, one of the more pressing problems the new president will face showed itself in stark profile today. These people represent only a small proportion of Manila's poor and dispossessed. The country's economic decline under the Marcos years left them with little else to do but to scavenge on fetid garbage dumps for odd bits to sell. So, happy about the change in government and taking their cue from the new president's promise to feed the poor and house the homeless, they laid claim to this plot of government land today.
We are hoping that our president
Mrs. Corazon Aquino will give this land for me, for these people, for us, for all of us here.
But it was her country's foreign policy which dominated the new president's day. This was her meeting with EEC ambassadors. Though the people now most concerned about the direction the Aquino foreign policy will take, and for good reason, are not the Europeans, but the Americans. In the end, the Americans did well in helping to spirit Mr. Marcos out of the country. But before that, there were President Reagan's deeply embarrassing, fumbling statements about the election. And we learned here tonight, in Manila, that one reason why the Americans temporized for so long and gave such critical support to a corrupt dictator may have something to do with the fact that Mr. Marcos gave millions of dollars to the Reagan re-election campaign, a great deal of it laundered through middlemen in the United States. About 10 days ago, President Reagan's special envoy, Philip Habib, came here to try to help ease the transition from the Marcos regime. Tonight, he's back in town, trying to salvage America's good name. Trevor McDonald, ITN, Manila.
Every day they take to the streets, still unable to believe that their candidate is now the president. Today they marched outside her offices in the business district of Manila. Up on the 7th floor, the president welcomed ITN into her tiny office, tiny by presidential standards, an area she has declared a smoke-free zone because of an allergy she has to cigarette smoke. She works under a portrait of her assassinated husband and herself. She still wears her campaign colour yellow, even her glasses are yellow. In her first interview for British television, she talked about herself and the president.
Mrs. President, John Suchet from ITN London. May I first of all congratulate you on behalf of the British public.
Well, thank you.
How do you want your people to call you? Mrs. President, Madam President, or Corey?
Well, to my very good friends, I've told them just continue calling me Corey. Well, to the others, and I guess in public, it has to be Mrs. President.
In that case, Mrs. President, may I ask you, you have no experience as a politician until now. Will that be a handicap for a president?
I guess in a way it would be, but then at the same time, when the people are just so wary of the professional or traditional politicians, it could be a plus on my side. So there are two different ways of looking at it. And
what might your husband have thought if he was alive today?
Well, in fact, my mother-in-law and I were talking about this on the day that I took my oath. And she said she could just imagine that her son was laughing, and this was something nobody ever imagined, and least of all me. And definitely when we were in the United States, living in exile there, I would ask my husband, so what happens, later on if, something happens to you, who takes over? And he would always say, well, there are many people who will take over, and he would repeat this to his sisters and also to our friends. And I'm sure he never ever thought that his own wife would someday be president.
What galvanized you? What made you give up a private life for this?
Well, I remembered what my husband said, that if there is something you can do and you do not do it, then the rest of your life you will regret not having done this. And the public perception was that I was the only one who could unify the opposition, and this was so essential because it would have been impossible to defeat Mr. Marcos if we had two candidates. And so when it seemed that it was really only I who could unite the opposition forces, I realized there was no way I could get out of it.
You always said in the campaign that you would win, but the odds against you were enormous. Did you really honestly believe you would win?
Yes. People find it very hard to understand, and in fact, I guess most of media thought that I was being so naive that I could win against a 20-year dictator who had all of the powers. Except I kept on insisting he didn't have people power, and this became so clear to me because everywhere we went, people came in the thousands, and I saw a personal commitment on the part of our people. And I knew this was something that Mr. Marcos could not contend with.
Now, you have the communists, you have the New People's Army. You will have problems, won't you?
Oh yes, definitely so. I realize only too well the many problems that I have inherited from the Marcos regime. But again, at least there is a hope that we can do something with our country. And as far as the NPAs are concerned, I have been told that many of them would like to come back to the fold and would like to join our to rejoin our society.
Will you welcome them back?
Yes, so long as they renounce all forms of violence, they lay down their arms and pledge allegiance to my government.
And if they don't?
Well, then we will have the military after them. We cannot allow anyone to fight the government.
You're not in danger of becoming a dictator like your predecessor?
No, of course not. The reason why I was in this was to restore our rights and freedoms. Besides, even if I wanted to, the people would not let me.
She will soon move these offices into the presidential palace for sheer space and convenience. But, she says, she will never, ever live there. John Suchet, News at 1, in the President's office, Manila.
To be in Manila today is to experience a state of constant excitement. The drama of the Aquino Revolution, its speed and its surprise, have transformed every political rally into a fiesta and has made people take to the streets in a never-ending mood of national euphoria. The rapidity of the change has been stunning. 2 weeks ago, the Marcos government locked Aquino supporters out of this stadium in Luneta Park. Today, stadium and park, with their proud history of a country's struggle against tyrants, again belong to the people. Lakas ni bayan, they say here, it means people's power. But behind the slogans and the excited crowds, there lie a formidable array of daunting political problems which could bring the Aquino presidency to a precipitate and disastrous end. Mrs. Aquino made the campaign promises. The question now is, can she deliver?
During the campaign, I saw that the great desire of the people was for change. And Cory Aquino represented the hope for change. If Cory Aquino does not deliver that, does not translate that hope in the campaign into reality, it would be a disaster.
There's a danger in this whole concept of people power, because between people power and a mob in the streets there's a very fine dividing line. So Cory Aquino is going to have to fine-tune this sort of thing. She's going to have to study how to keep the people happy, how to do something for them, and not destroy the economic structure of this country. She has got her work cut out for her. It's going to be a tremendous job for her to tackle all these problems.
By far, the biggest of Mrs. Aquino's problems is the economy. In general terms, the economy should have been sustained by the fact that this country can virtually feed itself. It's rich in the vast amount of food it produces. But corruption and economic mismanagement during the Marcos years resulted in a massive loss of confidence by the big financial institutions in the country. More to the point, the Marcos years have bequeathed to the Aquino presidency a massive international debt of $35 billion. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, are now demanding the kind of economic stringency which could land the Aquino presidency in deep trouble.
If she conforms to the IMF policies, it's going to trigger a lot of opposition from among the people who held high hopes in the Aquino administration. I am not sure that she has the strength. I am not yet convinced that she has the strength and the will to carry out her approach to the debt problem that she promised during the election campaign.
There is another side to the economic problem. It can be called simply Mr. Marcos's prime site billion-dollar real estate in the United States. To acquire all this, as well as million-dollar properties in Hawaii and London, Mr. Marcos milked the nation's treasury dry. That is a source of even greater rage here than the imposition of martial law. Hours after she assumed the presidency, Mrs. Aquino dispatched this man, among others, to America to begin proceedings to get back to hidden Marcos wealth. He discovered Mr. Marcos had preempted the move.
We found that recently, for instance, some valuable art works belonging to the government that have been displayed in a townhouse in New York City were mysteriously carted away just hours after Mr. Marcos left the Malacanang Palace.
He's got $1 billion in ready cash in banks in Switzerland, West Germany, and the United States. Can you imagine a regime that has so systematically taken the treasure of the Philippines and brought this abroad? And now Cory is going to have to rebuild this economy that's been shattered, and this is the moral values of our country which have been destroyed by the Marcos regime.
But Mrs. Aquino has already run into one problem which could destroy her government in months, if not in weeks. Her partnership with Salvador Doy Laurel was only brought about by the insistence of the powerful Catholic Church. She and Laurel are, in fact, political enemies. They were forced to submerge their differences in the interests of a united campaign against Mr. Marcos. Now that that campaign has been successful, their administration is split into Laurel and Aquino factions. There's open squabbling for cabinet jobs, and Mr. Laurel, Vice President, Foreign Minister, and Prime Minister, is deeply unhappy and on the verge of quitting.
Mr. Laurel is in the habit of smiling, but I am positively certain that the reason why he did not smile yesterday during the caucus is because a number of people has been pressuring him. That's why these choices in the cabinet. And I understand from private sources that Mr. Laurel is even on the verge of resigning from being a Prime Minister designate and a Minister of Foreign Affairs.
And one new minister from the Laurel Unido faction admits unhappiness about the cabinet jobs they have been given.
Well, I would say by and large they're not ecstatic because so far about 3 cabinet positions have been given to us, and we feel that there are more qualified people within the UNIDO leadership that could still make a good contribution to.
But it's the armed forces which may prove a greater threat to Mrs. Aquino's administration than all the squabbles over cabinet jobs. The change in the army's role from the days when it was used by Mr. Marcos to enforce unjust laws could hardly be more dramatic. It is a people's army now. But it was never the initial idea of the army to install Mrs. Aquino as president. The reform movement within the armed forces staged a military coup. Only when that coup was in danger of failing did the army enlist the mass support of Cory Aquino. Now Mrs. Aquino has been told bluntly by Defense Minister Enrile that the army's support is conditional on far-reaching reforms.
Some of my sources told me that in a very diplomatic manner, in a friendliest of manner, and with a smiling face, the defense minister told Mrs. Aquino, Madam, the reform movement has brought down a government. If these reforms will not be instituted, I am afraid that they can do it again.
Don't forget, the military still holds the balance of power in this country. It may be a civilian government, and thank God it is a civilian government, but the military still hold the key to keeping power. As a matter of fact, at this very moment, Cory, who's very courageous, has been cautioned by her own family and her own cabinet members to be alert, because there may be a try on her life, not only by the New People's Army and the Communists, by the Marcos loyalists, but there are other factions which may want to plunge this country back into turmoil. It just takes one bullet.
It is a sobering comment on the political climate here that an assassination attempt on the new president is regarded a real possibility. In any event, most commentators agree that the president has a few months at most to deliver on her campaign promises or to face political annihilation. Trevor McDonald, ITN,
Manila.
Cardinal Sin's power in the Philippines rests on the almost fanatical devotion of 40 million Filipinos to the Catholic Church, almost 80% of the population in this Asia's only Christian country. Before he came to office from an obscure rural diocese 10 years ago, the church was notorious for its opulence and closeness to the Marcos regime. He announced straight away that he'd fight injustice wherever it was committed, and he used pastoral letters, messages from the pulpit and the church's newspapers and radio station to denounce what he called the repression and moral degeneracy of the president and his supporters. As the election approached, it was he who persuaded Corazon Aquino to stand in the place of her assassinated husband, Benigno. He also helped forge the alliance between her and the opposition party Unido, led by his friend Salvador Laurel, now vice president. During the election itself, his messages effectively urged the people to support Aquino, and when, afterwards, President Marcos declared that he had won, it was Cardinal Sin who called the people out onto the streets to stand between the presidential troops and the headquarters of the generals who had challenged the president. When he arrived in Rome earlier this week, the Cardinal made no bones about his satisfaction with the outcome.
Because of the influence of the bishops and the church, it came out beautifully.
This afternoon, in London, I asked Cardinal Sin whether there was any clash between the Pope's preaching and his cardinal's practice.
I think the Holy Father understands our problem in the country. And it was not really politics that we have entered into. It was the saving of human lives. So it was something moral.
Of course, this is a view taken by many of the priests in South and Central America.
Well, of course, the cause is politics, but then that was a very extraordinary period of the history when there was the order of President Marcos to kill our people. And I think the pastor should do something to stop this. If I cannot stop this, then in the middle of the night, I would not be able to sleep because my conscience will be pricked.
Did you have any difficulty at all in your recent meeting with the Pope convincing him that you did the right thing in stepping into the political arena?
I think the Holy Father understands this problem because he came from Poland.
Do you feel confident with what you have helped achieve in the Philippines that Mrs. Aquino will be able to create the reforms that are necessary now?
I think she is a very valuable woman, and I know that she is indeed very knowledgeable, very assertive, and she will be, I think, blessed by God. You know, this is an answer to the prayers of the country.